Hey HCDA, and welcome back to my step-by-step spoiler-free guide to Techtonica. Now last time around I showed you how to actually start automating your fuel production and thereby also your mining and smelting production. It's almost completely automated because we still need to press the crank once every hour, but other than that we should have a pretty decent amount of production going. Now, if you came here from the previous episode straight away, you want to make sure you continue producing some of these excavator bits Mark II and put those into your elevator so you start drilling up to level 4. Also, if you haven't done so yet, make sure that you upgrade the Terminal Victor to tier 2. Getting to level 2 also means that you can now upgrade the mining speed of all your mining drills to 150%, so that's only 15 cores for a very large upgrade, so I recommend that you get that. And while you're at it, you might as well start working on things like the smelting speed as well. That will just mean that everything that you're already producing is going to be producing even more than it was before. And while you're waiting for level 4 to be excavated, there are a couple of things that you can do to start improving your base. For example, making sure all the different production phases that you have are actually interconnected. And keep in mind that things like stairs and floors all guide the power to wherever you need it to go, so all of your power production will actually be linked up. And by linking up all your production facilities, it makes it a lot easier to centralize your power, so if you have to press those crank generators, you only have to do it in a single spot. Automating the mining facilities that we have is obviously also a very good idea, because that will just make your life easier moving forward. And while you're at it, you might as well set up some basic production facilities for the other base materials that we're going to need pretty much everywhere around the place. Once level 4 is unlocked, go and explore. After just a little bit of exploring, you should run into a core composer, which you can then use to make your research life a lot easier, because all you need to do is make sure all your cores go straight into this machine and it will automatically stack them for you. Now, obviously, as you can see, you do need some height available because this thing can actually stack a lot of cores, but it doesn't really work if you hit the ceiling very quickly. At the same level, you can also find an assembler Mark II that's actually going to produce 3 times as much as you can handcraft from the same resources. So basically, I recommend that you put this somewhere central in your base that you can easily reach it, and then produce whatever you need that is relatively expensive through this specific machine. We'll be able to make more of these later on, but for now we just have the one. You should also find plenty of water wheels, so we can now unlock the technology for that as well. Now, in order to make those water wheels, we're going to need some shiverthorn extract, and you make that in exactly the same way as we've done with the kindle vine before. You put some of those seeds into a planter, those start making the actual plants. You put those plants into a thresher, then you put the seeds back on the belt. It's exactly the same layout as we made in the previous episode. The stuff from the thresher in this case is the shiverthorn buds that are coming out of that. That goes yet again into another thresher, but in this case we're getting out the shiverthorn extract, what we actually need. We're also going to get some plant matter. You can either use those to fuel some more miners and stuff like that. You can store them up. Doesn't really matter for the moment because we're just going to need a little bit of this shiverthorn extract. And you might notice that even though we're producing 30 per minute, the buds that is, the second thresher actually only takes in 5 per minute, so we're going to be overproducing those buds anyway. Now, once again, if you need some more plant matter, that might be a reason why you focus on this, but for now, just get that extract going because we're only interested in those water wheels. There's a couple of different ways you can lay out your water wheels and crank generators, but this is the most straightforward way to do it. You just put the water wheel, well, in the water, obviously, and then you can connect 10 crank generators to each water wheel. You can check that ratio by just walking up to your water wheel. You can see the torque. It produces 100 of that, and each single generator takes up 10. So, well, by doing that math, you can put up 10 of each, so I have 5 on each side. Now, of course, the crank generators themselves are producing the power. They need to be on some sort of flooring, and that flooring needs to be connected to your main floor somehow. So this is the most straightforward way to do it. You can use stairs or whatever else you want, but yeah, this is the most straightforward way to do it. Now, and all you need to do is make yourself another couple of these water wheels, and then just make sure you have all your power automated. Now, I would highly recommend that you connect all your power production to your elevator as well, because this is not entirely obvious. I actually don't think the game tells you this early on, but the power is actually transported through the elevator as well. So I'm back here at the first level. there's no power production here whatsoever, but because I connected my power floor on the second level to this one, or at least to the elevator, if I now have a assembler here and I start putting in some stuff, you can see this is working just fine. You can see it's getting power even though I have no power production on this floor. So long story short, you can dedicate entire levels just to power production and then use that power wherever you want as long as you connect it to your elevator. And if dedicating entire levels to power production sounds really weird, well, this entire facility that I'm showing you right now is actually just enough to power everything that we've built so far. And honestly, it's not even that much. We just have some planters going on, which is actually the brunt of the power production. And we have a tiny little bit of production, but most of it isn't actually automated just yet. So you can see that power consumption really scales up quite heavily in this game if you're not too careful. That said, we definitely want to start scaling up our factory now, because this tiny little factory is not going to cut it any longer. However, in order to do so, you kind of want to centralize some of your production, because otherwise you'll just be running all over the place, and making sure that everything goes to a singular place is where the monorail system comes in handy. In order to make a good use of a monorail system, you're going to need two things. You're going to need the monorail depot. This is where you deposit and then collect your items. And you're going to need some tracks, and that will allow you to actually have the monorail drive from A to B. I also recommend that under the transportation tab you pick up the rail runner upgrade, which actually allows you to travel by yourself through the monorails as well. And while you're at it, you might probably also want to pick up tool belt 2, so you can actually put a lot more stuff on your toolbars. So you might be wondering, why would I ever use monorails over belts? And honestly, the difference isn't that massive, especially if you only have a short distance to cover. On longer distances, however, as you can see, the monorail is shooting off its items really fast across the map, so it has that going for it for one. On top of that, the monorail actually works in two directions, so it's kind of two belts in one. You can use it to supply stuff from this monorail station, but you can also, for example, get the fuel on board from the other side and then use that fuel to fuel your mining station. So I basically only need one monorail where I would need two belts instead. You can also use the monorail as your personal transportation system, and the best way to do that is actually stand slightly next to it and then jump up to it, keep your jump button pressed, and then you will start traveling across the rail. Now again, this isn't really useful if you're only going to cover a short distance, but if you have a more complex factory, this is definitely a useful transportation method to have available. It's worth noting that in order to actually be able to travel on the rails, you're going to need to craft the rail runner after unlocking that technology. The equipment part of that is not very spelled out in the description, so make sure you craft that, otherwise you won't be able to actually travel on your rails. Now, I wouldn't be surprised when the first time you build your monorail, you put it down and it's not working. And you might be wondering why that is, because you clearly have plenty of power. Well, that's probably because you actually haven't built an accumulator. This thing will store up some power that it can then draw from. So, for example, you can see over here, this accumulator has a 30 megajoule charge. And that is actually what, if you click open the monorail, it's referring to over here. So it doesn't actually draw strictly from your power grid, but it's going to draw from your power surplus that is stored in the accumulators. No accumulators, no monorails. Regardless of how you decide to actually transport your items, belts or monorails, I would recommend that you start building a central base. But as you can see, I don't recommend doing that in Victor, because, well, honestly, we don't have enough space to do everything I want to do in a main base. Rather, I would recommend that you go explore sectors 5 and 6, because you will have plenty of space there. So, spoiler warning, if you haven't explored them yet, go and do that now. Okie dokie, so welcome to Sector 5 Admin. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff in our way that we need to clear out before we can actually build a base here, but once we do, we will have a lot of open space. Ta-da! Not entirely sure if it's intended behavior to just go and delete the entire building, but if you do, you actually get a massive amount of building materials in return for that as well. And like I said, with all this open space, it's a perfect location to build a central base. So let's start using all of those platforms and stairs and stuff that we just got to actually start making this into a civilized base. Now, as you can see, I'm using this little island here in the middle as a baseline for the ground floor, and I'm building some stairs down. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because you can actually build several levels later on in order to actually kind of turn this into a central mega factory. One step at a time, though. We're still going to start out with the ground floor and keep it simple for now. Okay, so let's start out really simple. We're just going to bring in the copper ingots that we were already producing on level 1 and 2. We're bringing them to level 5, the admin level, and then we're going to set up one machine for every type of product that's just being produced by copper ingots. Very, very simple, with a box at the end to catch up the overflow. Then similarly, we're going to be bringing in a second belt, this time with the iron ingots that we're making. And if you're wondering how you can make the conveyor belts actually do what you want, just build the belt in the direction where you want it first. But sometimes you will see splitters and mergers appearing where you don't want them to. Just build the belt anyway, and then you can switch between the different settings just by pressing V like this. So for example, if you accidentally build a splitter like I've done now, just hover over it, press V, and you can switch it back to a normal turn. And then again, just set up one machine dedicated to every item you can make from iron ingots. If you have machines that are particularly slow, for example, the assembler that is making the wire only needs 1.5 ingots per minute, so that's almost nothing, and it's actually also producing rather slow, so only 9 per minute, you might want to set up 1 or 2 more of them. We also have mechanical components that are made from both iron ingots and copper ingots, and I recommend completely automating those as well, just by using the last little belt with the copper ingots and combining that with the iron ingot belt, and there you go, and you have everything you need in order to make those. Now, generally speaking, machines in Techtonica tend to be super efficient. Let's take this one for example. It's going to be producing 80 of these per minute, which is actually way more than we need. So we don't necessarily want this to be producing at full speed, and that kind of holds for most of these other machines as well. On top of that, there's about a gazillion different machines that we're going to be making that we do kind of want to automate. You don't want to handcraft them because that's super inefficient, but at the same time we also don't necessarily need thousands and thousands of inserters, which would happen if you completely automate them. So we're going to take a middle ground there. The main benefit from having a central base is because we're actually producing all the different items locally, it's very easy to hand feed stuff to different machines and making sure that we don't overproduce stuff that we don't need to overproduce, and that we automate what we want to automate. So let's say, for example, science, very basic. Needs a wire and it needs some of these components. Now I can just fly over here, I can grab a whole stack of those. So of course I just built it, so it's not quite a lot yet. And I can just dump that in this inventory over here, like so. I have some other items there as well. Use some of these filter inserters, and then just have this completely automated. Well, not completely automated. I will need to revisit this every now and then and put in some more materials, but this is going to run for quite a while before I actually need to come back here. Now, if you do want to run belts between this, you can, but the problem with that is that this is actually going to suck up all the production of wire that I currently have, and I also need wire to make other things, and I don't necessarily need thousands of signs. I will need it in the long run, so at some point we'll probably start automating that as soon as we've scaled up our production sufficiently, but for now, this will do. In order to make sure that the hand feeding doesn't become too inefficient, I would recommend sticking assemblers together that actually produce items that are also used together. So for example, the inserters are made from these mechanical parts, but we also need the mechanical parts to make the long inserters, which also happens to need the original inserters, which also go into the filter inserters that then need to be combined with the mechanical parts. So all in all, these three buildings use very similar inputs. They actually use some inputs from each other as well, but you don't necessarily want all your normal inserters to be transformed into these two types either. Another example of that are electric components and Mark I belts. They need exactly the same input, so if you just put them right next to each other, then either if you're overproducing one, you can just transport the items from one to the other, or if you are going to be in a refilling around, you might as well fill up both of them at the same time. You might also want to repurpose some of the base machines every now and then, depending on what you actually need. So for example, over here, I've been making copper frames now for only a little while. I already have over 500 of them. I'm not going to need anywhere near as much of those, so I might just as well repurpose this machine for a little while and make some additional wires. Anyway, while this production is plugging away, let's go back to Victor. For example, we're also producing these plant matter frames and kindlefine extract over here, and we are going to need that to produce a whole lot of other things, so we might as well start bringing it to our home base. I was also making shiverthorn extract over here, but in a kind of poorly optimized facility and kind of out of the way. So let's pick up this facility, move it close to the elevator, and optimize it while we're at it. There we go, the usual 10 planter, 1 thresher setup, but now we actually have 6 more threshers threshing that stuff into shiverthorn extract and plant matter. Now this is complete overkill for now, but at least now we have the entire facility optimized and we can actually start using that shiverthorn extract to good use. The plant matter is not going to be very useful for the moment, but we can also just throw that into a couple of smelters or something like that and use it like that. And in the meanwhile bring in the other plant-based material to the main base. And now we want to start leveraging our production capabilities here by step expanding not only our main base but also the incoming resources to that main base. In order to do that, we're going to need to have all of the base buildings that you need in order to do that. So miners, smelters, assemblers, and storage units, for example. And I know I'm going to have to convince some of you that you definitely do not want to automate your mall. All I've done here is just toss in a couple of stacks of resources. And this has been running for just a couple of minutes and I already have way more miners that I'm going to need to expand my operations. And in the meanwhile, while I'm actually doing that, I'm going to be producing even more miners. But I don't want that automated, because if I do that, by the time I get back, I will have hundreds of miners, which is more than we're ever going to need. So that's just wasted production right there. Similarly, I have some smelters. Smelters are kind of an exception actually, because they need quite a lot of limestone. Limestone is really easy to get, but if you set it up like I've done over here, it's actually pretty slow. But like I said, we're not going to need a massive amount of these, so this is just fine. It's just going to take a little bit longer to actually build. But for example, look at the assemblers. I already have almost 100 assemblers. I'm not going to be able to build that quickly. Similarly, over almost 100 of these storage units as well. Now we're going to do the same thing, but now for the more complex buildings. But before we do that, I'm going to upgrade some quality of life stuff, and in order to do that, I'm going to need some science. But just this single assembler has been producing science for quite a long while now, just by tossing in a couple of stacks of everything once again. And I'm just going to drop this back off at the ore composer in order to unlock all that science to be used. With all those purple cores available, you want to start pretty much picking up everything that has to do with purple science. Most of those are going to be upgrades that we have left. A couple of them are going to be upgrading our buildings, which is of course very useful as well. And there's also some new unlocks in terms of things we can craft. And that's the next thing we're going to expand our base with. With the upgrades available as well as the materials that we're now bringing in, we can start making some coolant that actually makes burrowing your way through the mountain a lot easier. And while we're at it, we might as well start producing some of these cooling systems. You can also set up some facilities for the plant materials as well as some water power stuff. Everything you need in order to get a monorail working, and everything related to getting power from A to B. And last but not least, right next to the electrical components, the upgrade to that, namely the processor units, which are made from electrical components along with some plant matter frames. This facility over here produces pretty much everything you need for the early and mid game. And I just want to emphasize this once again. If you would want to do this with belts and completely automate it, it would be a logistical nightmare, because all of this would need, well, belt access somehow. So it would be not only like 5 times as big, it would be complete spaghetti as well. Well, right now it's super easy to get around. It's very easy to find what you need. Once again, this is why I don't recommend automating everything. You will notice, however, that the trickle of materials that we have coming in, specifically the iron now at this point, but also to some degree the copper, we definitely need to start upgrading that because it's no longer going to cut it. So let's turn back to our miners and smelters. So armed with a lot of belts, a lot of inserters, and a lot of other stuff we need to upgrade our mining facilities, we're going to just revisit all the sites we already have, because we have all the belts and stuff like that in place. We just need to upgrade the amount of, well, basically the amount of machines that we have available here. And here's an example how you can very easily scale up your production, but they are going to run into new issues straight away as well. So for example, in the starting zone over here, I just dug out the area around these starting nodes. These are literally the first 2 starting nodes that you use, and you can fit like something like 12 miners around that if you want, probably even more if you really tried. So that's going to be producing a lot of iron, but then we have the second problem that we actually need to fuel all these miners, and on top of that we need a whole bunch of smelters to handle all the ore, which also need more fuel. So make sure you unlock the Mark II belts and set up a production facility for that in your main base. Now, while those Mark II belts are building up, you might as well start producing some more fuel as well, because otherwise we're not going to be able to make use out of all of that mining and smelting. So One way of doing that is actually building more of these kindlevine farms. That's not a bad idea, honestly, because we are going to need much more plant matter frames and things like that, but there's a different way that you might want to consider now as well. In the technology tree under synthesis, there is the biobrick that you can unlock, which allows you to put plant matter and limestone together and form a biobrick. And biobricks are actually a pretty efficient type of fuel. You can also upgrade those so you can make them more efficient. So it's the same item, it just lasts longer, and all of that is going to be pretty useful. One of these shiverthorn farms can actually fuel up to 6 assemblers, making biobricks, assuming you also bring in the limestone for that, but luckily we have that right around the corner. Now, of course, in order to get the limestone to make the biobricks, you're actually going to need to fuel these miners as well, so you're going to consume part of the fuel that you're making, but it's definitely going to be worth it, because just look at this. Even with just a single upgrade, the biobricks are only consumed at a rate of 0.24 per minute, which is way more efficient than what we were doing with the kindlevine stems. The main challenge with this particular type of fuel production is actually not to produce the limestone or the plant matter, it's actually to make sure you're consuming enough of the shiverthorn extract in order for this not to back up, because as you can see, these belts are currently kind of at a standstill, so I'm not producing the amount of plant matter that I would be producing otherwise. Luckily, while I was building the fuel facility, I actually also built a whole lot of conveyor belts Mark II, so I can start upgrading the mining facility to make use of that fuel. Now, in order to upgrade a facility, you want to unlock and then craft a replacer. This is a equipment that will actually allow you to upgrade things without having to remove them first. Using this tool is a little bit counterintuitive if you're used to some other factory games. So the way this works is you actually select the tool, and then you hover over the building that you want to upgrade, and then you select the item by scrolling your mouse wheel that you want it to transform into. So for example, like this, I can select all of these belts like so, and then this will all be upgraded to a Mark II belt. Still pretty easy, but slightly different than what you might be able to use in other games. Between the additional fuel, the faster belts, and all the upgrades that we did in terms of scaling, there's just one thing missing, because you might notice that your inserters actually have a hard time keeping up with your smelters, because we upgraded the smelters as well. This is where the fast inserters come in. These are really easy to make, so make sure you add them to your main base. And with those fast inserters, your mining facility should run at full speed. Now, keep in mind that these fast inserters do actually need a tiny bit of power, so you will need to extend your floor from your elevator to wherever your miners are if you want to make sure that these are powered, or you can use the high voltage cables instead. I find them really messy, so I just built the floor so I can also walk around myself. But yeah, that's completely up to you. Just keep in mind that you can definitely just use the normal inserters if you're willing to build a couple of additional smelters instead. So between upgrading your fuel facility, your mining facilities, in general, just upgrading a whole lot of stuff that we were already doing, and setting up this central base, you're probably quite a few hours on the way now already. And honestly, it can be very tempting to just keep scaling up, and considering this is a factory game, there is nothing wrong with that per se. However, if you want to be a little bit more efficient, then this is a good point to start looking at your objectives once again and start progressing on that, which is exactly what I will be doing in the next episode, because we have some more levels to explore and complete. Anyway, if you're still here, you're awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.